Good evening, everybody. Welcome again to another edition of Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross, and in the studio tonight with me is Day Tucker, our Rural Affairs correspondent. Welcome back, Day.
Thank you.
So without any further ado, Day, we're going to dive straight into tonight's news. And the first item on our list tonight is the Scottish budget debate. The Stage 1 debate of the Scottish Budget Bill was passed in Holyrood today by 65 votes to 54. Following agreement with the Scottish Green Party, the budget included provisions to deliver a national concessionary travel scheme offering free bus travel for 18s and under. The Scottish Government will undertake work on design and due diligence with a view to introducing such a scheme in January 2021. Also to ensure the total uplift for the police service of £60 million in the next financial year, with £13 million of additional investment in frontline services and a further £5 million of additional capital investment on top of the £42 million already committed. Support for local services with £95 million of further funding for local government, taking the total additional Scottish Government support for local authorities to £589 million. And to further support Scotland's efforts to end our contribution to climate change, a £45 million package of investment in low-carbon projects has been agreed, including £25 million of additional investment in local energy efficiency projects, £15 million for local authority investment in active travel, taking the total investment of active transport in the next financial year to £100 million. Also, a further £5 million to develop options for enhanced rail services. Services to protect women and girls from gender-based violence will receive an extra £1 million this year with the launch of a £13 million fund. Delivering the Equally Safe Fund, which brings together a number of previous funding streams, will support frontline organisations with a focus on prevention and early intervention. Funding of up to £20 million to help reduce the harms and deaths caused by drugs and alcohol. People from disadvantaged and remote and rural communities will benefit from a £25 million regeneration funding. Commenting on the budget bill passing Stage 1, the Finance Secretary, Kate Forbes, said, "I'm pleased that Parliament has supported this budget at Stage 1, which will deliver certainty for vital public services. It'll tackle the climate emergency and provide record investment for health and social care. This budget will now deliver free bus travel for young people, £1.8 billion of investment in low-carbon projects, and a child payment to lift children out of poverty, and £15 million for health and care services. I look forward to concluding the budget process next week, when all parties should recognise the support that it provides for local government, police, tackling climate change and supporting drug services, and hope they will back this budget for Scotland." The Scottish Green MSP John Finney said the vote will make bus travel free for over 1 million young people across Scotland. This transformational policy has been widely welcomed and will be of great benefit to the young people and families across Scotland. So, Dave, this sounds like a very fulsome budget.
It
a
does.
Great deal of money going into all kinds of worthy causes and places.
Yes.
Is there anything that stands out particularly?
The one that presses my buttons is the young people getting free bus travel.
Yeah.
That is going to give so many, particularly in my rural communities, an opportunity to apply for jobs where they wouldn't normally apply because they can't afford to get there.
And of course, travelling to work is a huge burden on young people, especially with work being sometimes so poorly paid.
Yes. I mean, I know when we worked away trying to get rural agricultural apprenticeships, and in fact any kind of agricultural apprenticeship, a lot of my young people were saying, yes, I want to do it, but I can't afford the bus fares. Since then, Scottish Government brought in free travel for youngsters who are on an agricultural apprenticeship, so they allowed them to take up these apprenticeships. Now, these are our future workforce.
Of course.
So, and you know, why would they not do that? And I think it's great what the Scottish Government have done.
It does seem to be spending a considerable amount of money on investing in people, more than in things.
Yes,
from this budget, it's investing a lot in looking after people and in making sure that they're safe as
Yes.
well. I mean, there's also more money for the police, there's more money for local authorities, health and care services. It is a very broadly...
It's a people-based budget.
Yeah, it's not a budget based on GDP or money or financial.
And the only group
interests.
that could argue with that would be the Tories.
The Tories would probably say, well, yes, but that's increasing public spending.
That's right. And that, of course, did we not see the First Minister talking about it, and she was saying that the 20 million was invested in something, and one of the Tories, the deputy, what's she called, that lady that is the deputy Conservative woman?
Oh, yes, I know who you mean.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Anyway, she's always moaning, and she was
Annie
complaining.
Wells?
That's the one.
Annie Wells.
She was complaining because about 15 million. She didn't seem to realise that 20 million was more than 15 million.
Well, it's not unusual for the Tories not to be able to do arithmetic in Scotland anyway. But anyway, it seems like a remarkably good budget. And considering the fact that the British government has not actually created its own budget yet.
Yes.
So our Treasury Minister has had to work with nothing.
Yes.
With no idea what the British government is going to give us in our block grant.
Yes.
So this is a blind budget, really. So it's remarkable even from this point of view as well.
Yes.
I think I'll move on to our next story because it's linked in many ways to this. And this is about increased funding for preventing drug deaths. Additional funding of up to £20 million is being delivered to help reduce the harms and deaths caused by drug and alcohol use in the Scottish Government's budget for 2020 and 2021. This is an increase of £7.3 million from within the health portfolio on top of the initial proposals in the draft budget. The increased funding will help deliver recommendations of the Drug Deaths Task Force and provide investment for mental health support. It will also allow wider consideration to additional NHS-funded rehabilitation beds. At the UK Government Drugs Conference in Glasgow today, UK Policing Minister Kit Malthouse dismissed calls for drugs consumption rooms as a distraction, saying it was legally incredibly difficult and the evidence from around the world was mixed. I'm concerned it's a distraction from the main event, which fundamentally there has to be more concentration and resource on innovative and different kinds of treatment. I worry that this is being used as a silver bullet. Speaking at the UK Drugs Summit today, Public Health Minister Joe Fitzpatrick announced an increase in drug spending, saying the voices of people with lived experience of drug use were the focus of our Scottish Drugs Conference this week, and it was an honour to hear about their various paths to recovery. I remain convinced that a public health approach to this emergency is the right way forward, and the extra £20 million of funding will go to a range of support services, including those helping the crossover between addiction and mental health. The UK government has made it clear at their summit that they're not willing to consider the bold, innovative approaches to this problem that I feel are needed. However, that doesn't mean that we will stop fighting for what we believe is right, and this extra investment will help us in our efforts to save lives. Now, this story day is part of a seemingly ongoing battle between the UK government and the Scottish government to see who's best at dealing with the drugs problem.
Well,
it's become very much a political football in recent weeks.
I think it's a bit harsh to say it's between the Scottish and the UK. I think it's the UK government is determined not to allow the Scottish government any opportunity to try and improve things. And it's this thing that came on, and I listened to Kit Malthouse being interviewed on GMS this morning, and I have to say I was absolutely livid when I listened to what he was saying. It was quite clear. I don't think he cares a toss about people who are suffering from drug issues. I think all he's interested in is politicising the whole thing and trying to make Scottish government look as though they're being inept, when in fact the exact opposite is the case. And it's yet another example of Scottish government leading on things as much as they can, and then the UK government coming in on the tail end, trying to claim it as theirs.
I noticed from Mr. Malthouse's speech that he says that the medical and expert opinions on the idea of safe drugs taking rooms is mixed. Now, as far as I was aware, it's not mixed at all. In fact, the evidence from around the world is very compelling that it creates a safe environment. It means that there is no drug paraphernalia left out in the streets or in the parks for children to pick up, or for council staff to end up getting a needle stick injury from. And so there seems to be almost no downsides to it. I can't understand why Mr. Malthouse seems to have taken so much against it. Is it just, as you say, because he's trying to score points?
It's endemic within his party to tell untruths and to simply propagandize what it is that they want or don't want to do. And you know, really, I think people are awake now to the nonsense that's being perpetrated, A, by their leader, Boris Johnson, who lies with impunity, but Theresa May was pretty good at it as well. Boris Johnson has just gone off the scale, and that has allowed all the rest of his party just to say what they want because they think people will believe it. But I have a bit more respect for voters.
Well, I know from studying this subject over many years that particularly in places like the Netherlands, where they decriminalised drug misuse, it meant that the police were freed up to do much more useful work, and they could chase real criminals instead of criminalising people who were addicted to drugs and alcohol. And in that, they did provide safe rooms for drug taking, clean needles, and clinical measured amounts of drugs, which they knew were clean and were not contaminated.
Exactly. And you know, the contamination side, when you think what I was told by my assistant on the farm, who knows all these things, not that he takes drugs, I hasten to add, but he's very aware of what's going on. And what he was telling me was that the dealers, in order to make the drugs look more than they actually are, volume-wise, they mix in stuff like soap powder,
talcum
powder, and stuff like that, and even lime, he said.
Wow.
Builder's lime. Well, can you imagine what that's doing to you?
Well, especially if you're shooting that into your veins. I mean, it's toxic.
Yes.
And the other thing I think is that if you decriminalise drug misuse, in other words, for those people who are addicted, you remove the criminality. They don't go out stealing to get their next fix. Plus, it takes all of the drug dealers off the street because there's no more market for them.
Absolutely.
And so you could pretty much wipe out the scourge straight away. But the trouble is, I know that the Tory government is committed to this war on drugs, which means that they criminalise everything and everybody to do with drugs. And so the problem goes on and on.
They're missing the big picture.
They don't seem to see.
I mean, they're always missing the big picture. They don't look at the consequences of their, you know, narrow vision.
Well, their political, their voter base, if you like, their demographic, are the sort of people who want to see drug takers in jail, frankly, and that's all they see. Anyway, I think we'll move on from that, though it is an important story. Now we're moving to Heathrow and the so-called third runway. Now, the third runway at Heathrow has caused a lot of problems over the years, but it's now been ruled illegal over climate change. Plans for a third runway at Heathrow Airport have been ruled illegal by the Court of Appeal because ministers did not adequately take into account the government's commitments to tackle the climate crisis. The ruling is a major blow to the project at a time when public concern about the climate emergency, is rising fast, and the government has set a target in law of net zero emissions by 2050. Prime Minister Boris Johnson could use the ruling to abandon the project, or the government could drop a new policy document to approve the runway. The government is now considering...
So what would be the point of the...
Well, we'll come to it in a minute, Dave. Let me just fight my way through this runway piece. The government is now considering its next steps, but it will not appeal against the verdict. Now, that's an interesting statement. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, said, "Our manifesto makes clear any Heathrow expansion will be industry-led. The airport expansion is core to boosting the global connectivity and levelling up across the UK. We also take seriously our commitment to the environment." These sound like mutually exclusive interests. The court's ruling is the first major ruling in the world to be based on the Paris Agreement and may have an impact in both the UK and around the globe by inspiring challenges against other high-carbon projects. The Lord Justice Lindblom said the Paris Agreement ought to have been taken into account by the Secretary of State. The National Planning Statement was not produced as the law requires. It's now clear that our governments can't keep claiming commitment to the Paris Agreement while simultaneously taking actions that blatantly contradict it, said Tim Crossland at legal charity Plan B, which brought the challenge. The bell is tolling on the carbon economy loud and clear. Plan B's challenge was one of a number of legal challenges against the government's national policy statement, which gave the go-ahead for the new runway in 2018, after MPs backed it by a large majority. Others were brought by local residents, councils, the Mayor of London, environmental groups including Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace. The challenges were dismissed in the High Court in May 2019, but the complainants took their cases to the Court of Appeal, which delivered its verdicts today. Plan B argued that the Paris Agreement target, which the government had ratified, was an essential part of government climate policy, and that ministers had failed to assess how a third runway would be consistent with the Paris target of keeping global temperature rise as close to 1.5 Celsius as possible. This is an opportunity for Boris Johnson to put the Heathrow expansion to bed and to focus on the most important diplomatic event of his premiership, the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow in November, said Lord Randall, a former Conservative MP and a climate advisor to the former Prime Minister Theresa May. It's his chance to shine on the world stage. Climate campaigner Greta Thunberg said, "Imagine when we all start taking the Paris Agreement into account." The Scottish Greens co-leader Patrick Harvey said, "This is a hugely welcome decision and a victory for those who have campaigned against air expansion in the face of the climate emergency." Heathrow and proponents of the third runway say it would provide an economic boost and is important for international business, particularly after Brexit. The Court of Appeal dismissed all appeals against the government, including on noise and air quality, apart from one, i.e. climate change, which is eminently fixable, said a spokeswoman for Heathrow. "We will appeal as an interested party to the Supreme Court on this one issue, and we are confident that we will be successful. Expanding Heathrow, Britain's biggest port and only hub, is essential to achieving the Prime Minister's vision of a global Britain. We will get it done the right way." Mike Cherry at the Federation of Small Businesses said, "The verdict is a blow to small firms who need a greater regional and global connectivity, as well as more opportunities to export." At a separate event on Thursday, Ashok Sharma, the business secretary and the president of November's UN COP26 climate summit, said, "The only economy which can avoid the worst effects of climate change and thus continue to deliver growth is a decarbonised economy. Our choices will make or break the zero carbon economy." So this is a very difficult balancing act, surely, for Boris Johnson's government this time, to try and, to balance this up. He wants this global Britain. Business wants a third runway, but everybody else doesn't. Britain is committed to reducing its carbon footprint.
So is he really saying that Heathrow is the only place in the whole of the British Isles that can be a hub for business?
Well, apparently it's the only major hub airport in the UK, in the same way that Frankfurt or Paris Charles de Gaulle or the other large airports in Europe, which connect up to smaller regional airports, are hubs. And I believe, I may be wrong in this, I'll check, but I believe that Heathrow Airport is one of the largest hub airports in the world already. And it's bursting at the seams and operating at about 99%.
So
capacity.
It's become unsustainable. So why doesn't he make another hub somewhere else?
Well, that's the other problem, though. That if they want to maintain their carbon target, they don't want more flights, they want fewer.
Fewer flights, right.
And that means fewer runways and less planes, basically. Right. And that obviously is a circle you cannot square when businesses are wanting you to have more planes flying in and out. They want more business, more money, more flights. and you've got to balance that against the noise, the air pollution, and the amount of space it takes up, and the increased risk of an accident.
Could they not move some of the passenger flights to other airports?
The difficulty here is that they can't increase the amount of carbon being spewed out of the airport. The trouble at the moment is Heathrow, as far as I'm aware, is the biggest carbon dioxide source in Europe on any one site, including power stations. It creates more carbon pollution than any other place in Europe already. And if Mr. Johnson is serious about meeting his climate promises of decarbonising by 2050, building another runway won't do that.
So
it does the opposite.
So there is a cost to him having this as the biggest hub.
It's very embarrassing.
It's embarrassing that we're the biggest polluter in Europe in terms of the airport.
But the thing is that the business people are driving this by saying they want more profits, they want more business. And so they want more expansion and more expansion. Eventually you end up with an airport that covers the whole of England virtually. And planes, millions of planes flying constantly in and out. So as this stops somewhere, I guess, and Boris is going to have a difficult time because the United Kingdom is hosting the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow in November this year. And they want to look like they're winning this battle, not making it worse.
Well, you could say, well, it's an opportunity for him to show that he means what he says.
Well, we'll wait and see what happens today. I'm not holding my breath at the moment. Anyway, speaking of transitions, the next story is about a thing called the Just Transition Commission. I'm having trouble with my teeth this evening. Responding to the interim report of the independent Just Transition Commission, the Climate Change Secretary, Rosanna Cunningham, today said, Scotland has been praised internationally for our work to tackle climate change. Our transition to net zero is already well underway, and I'm determined that there be no let-up in our efforts. The Commission is clear in its interim report that securing the economic and social opportunities associated with the net zero transition will require careful planning and collaboration between government, industry, workers and communities in the years ahead. The actions required by the 2045 date will transform all sectors of our economy and society. As the pace of our transition increases, ensuring fairness will become ever more important. So while the scale of the challenge imposed is in no doubt, the Commission's report is also clear. There are significant opportunities for Scotland. I'm grateful to the Commission for the work they've undertaken to date. This will be invaluable as we prepare for the publication of the updated climate change plan, which will outline our plans to reduce emissions in line with our revised targets and to start to demonstrate how the Scottish Government is placing a just transition at the heart of our transition to a net zero economy. We will now take time to consider the report in full. In the meantime, I look forward to continuing to work with the Commission to share our approach internationally in the lead up to the COP26 climate meeting in Glasgow later this year. So at the completely polar opposite end of the scale, we have the Scottish Government announcing that it's already planning ahead for a net carbon zero future for Scotland.
Yes.
I think what most people don't understand about this fair transition is what the fair transition part of that means.
Yes.
This is to compensate for businesses which are probably going to eventually have to cease as new cleaner industries start up. So it is a way of, as I understand it, of retraining staff and reinvesting some businesses' capital into new growth areas of green industry. And although there's not much detail on this at the moment, this is giving the Government of Scotland at least the beginnings of that movement now. And how they're going to transition and figuring out how to do it over the next few years. And of course, we're not hearing anything like this, unfortunately, from Westminster.
No.
It's as if the UK government really doesn't seem to know what it's doing at all.
Well, they don't.
Anyway, talking of the UK government not knowing what it's doing at all brings me to our next item, which is the UK government says that it will consider walking away from the Brexit talks in June.
Not again.
Well, yes, again, I'm afraid Boris Johnson is asking the European Union for a Canada-style trade deal, but will consider whether to walk away from talks in June and prepare for an orderly exit from the transition period. Setting out its negotiating mandate for EU talks, Downing Street said it wanted regulatory freedom from the EU and would not accept any role for the European Court of Justice in dispute resolution mechanisms. The government said it hoped to achieve the broad outline of an agreement by June, with the aim of finalising a deal by September. If not enough progress has been made by June, the government would need to decide whether the UK's attention should move away from negotiations and focus solely on continuing domestic preparations to exit the transition period in an orderly fashion. The threat sets the UK on course for leaving the transition period on World Trade Organization terms at the end of the year, unless either or both sides make major concessions within 4 months. While the UK wants to be free to set its own rules, the EU wants some degree of regulatory alignment, with the option of imposing tariffs if one side reneges. It would also like a role for the ECJ. Downing Street says this would restrict the UK's sovereignty more than in the EU's offers to other nations such as Japan, Canada and the United States. The UK's negotiating mandate asks for the following: a liberalised market for trade in goods with no tariffs, fees, charges or quantitative restrictions on trade for manufactured or agricultural products. Competition and subsidies to not be subject to the final agreement's dispute resolution mechanism, which had already previously been signalled in the political declaration. They also wanted a separate agreement on fisheries that would allow for annual negotiations on access to each other's waters, including allowable catch and shares. The EU wants fishing to be considered as part of the overall agreement. They also want an agreement on equivalence on financial services to be decided before the end of June. The British government also wants no participation in the European arrest warrant, but a similar extradition agreement as the EU has with Iceland and Norway, a position likely to cause alarm amongst law enforcement bodies. Addressing the House of Commons, Michael Gove, the Cabinet Office Minister in charge of Brexit planning, said that he was confident that those negotiations would lead to outcomes which work for both the UK and the EU. However, he added, Parliament, Brussels and the British people should not be in doubt. At the end of the transition period on December 31st, the United Kingdom will fully recover its economic and political independence. We want the best possible trading relationship with the EU, but in pursuit of a deal, we will not trade away our sovereignty. So whatever the outcome of the talks, businesses have been warned to expect disruption at the border from the 1st of January 2021, because the UK will not extend the transition period and will therefore be leaving the EU's single market and customs union. It is estimated that at least 50,000 new customs officials will be needed to cope with the new changes. However, leaving on WTO terms would mean trade tariffs and barriers on a large scale. On the issue of Northern Ireland, Mr Gove insisted the government respects the protocol in the withdrawal agreement, which leaves Northern Ireland in some alignment with the EU on customs. This would suggest that there needs to be some checks on goods crossing the Irish Sea, even though the UK government has repeatedly said there will not be, under any circumstances, be any new border infrastructure between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. Experts have questioned whether this is possible. The SNP spokesman, Pete Wishart, said that the offer to the EU was a load of bunkum, baloney and codswallop. This is nothing other than a route map to the cherished no deal, the real ambition of these Brexit zealots. They're even now prepared to break international law in order to achieve this outcome. Francis O'Grady, the Trades Union Congress General Secretary, accused the government of planning to water down people's employment rights and safety standards. The government is recklessly endangering working people's jobs and rights, she said. By abandoning the level playing field, ministers are deliberately undermining important protections like the right to paid holidays and safe limits on working hours. The UK rejected the EU's negotiating mandate when it was set out on Tuesday. Downing Street said it did not recognise the need for a level playing field for competition. It said Brussels was trying to impose onerous commitments that would undermine the UK's legal autonomy and right to set its own regulations. In return, Michel Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator, told reporters on Tuesday that the EU would not conclude an agreement at any price. He said if there was to be any chance of a deal by the end of the year, there would need to be no backtracking by the UK on past commitments made in the withdrawal agreement and the accompanying political declaration. The Scottish Government's Constitution, Europe and External Affairs Secretary Michael Russell said that the UK Government is heading for the hardest possible Brexit, either through a disastrous no deal or a basic trade agreement that will cause almost as much damage. Responding to today's publication of the UK Government's mandate for talks with the European Union, Mr Russell said its inclusion of red lines and not aligning to EU regulations and a stated willingness to walk away with no deal was the worst possible start to negotiations. He said the UK Government's strategy could cost the Scottish economy between £9 billion and £12.7 billion by 2030, compared with EU membership, and warned that Scotland's businesses would be hard hit. Mr Russell stressed the mandate took no account of the Scottish Government's views on any of the core issues, yet explicitly committed to reflect the unique characteristics of some UK overseas territories. Mr Russell said, as ambitions go, the UK Government's goals set an extraordinarily low bar. The free trade deal it is aiming for represents a hard Brexit and is little better than a disastrous no deal in terms of the economic damage it would cause. The people of Scotland voted overwhelmingly to remain in the EU, but all attempts to maintain a closer relationship have been completely ignored by the UK Government. In these proposals, Scotland is treated worse than Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man. The desire for a Canada-style trade deal would hit trade, limit the export of services and leave Scotland's gross domestic product more than 6% or £9 billion lower by 2030 than if we had stayed in the EU. But the UK Government has today made it clear it's prepared to walk away without any trade deal, which could risk that figure rising to £12.7 billion. That is simply reckless and puts people's livelihoods at risk. The plan will also mean that all Scottish citizens would lose the right to travel, work and study in Europe, and puts at risk access for our young people to programmes such as Erasmus+. We'll continue to argue for a closer relationship with the EU and will assert our right to align with European rules where we wish to. We will also consider whether we can take part in future EU programmes in devolved areas, even when the UK Government does not. The mandate published today has been drawn up without taking account of the Scottish Government's views on any of the core issues and will implement a Brexit that the Scottish people overwhelmingly rejected. We can't endorse it. The case for Scotland's right to choose its own future has grown stronger. Very strong words from Mike Russell, and yes. He appears to be basically saying that the Scottish Government will do what it wants to do when it's talking to Europe if this happens.
Yes, yes.
Even if the British Government doesn't want that.
That's right.
So clearly this is a collision course almost.
Well, it's a red line, isn't it?
Well, maybe this is the first time that the Scottish Government has drawn a red line or a line in the sand and said,
enough
if you
is
do
enough.
this.
I mean, it's like déjà vu. I feel we've been here before. We've heard all this stuff from Boris Johnson before, and the stamping of the feet to no, we will not take this and we won't take that, and heading for the no deal. We've been here before. Why are we doing this again? It's boring.
Yeah, I get the impression that Mr Johnson is taking another leaf out of Mr Trump's playbook when it comes to negotiating anything, any kind of transaction at all. He makes big threats and promises to stamp out if he doesn't get what he wants, and it's all very petulant. But really, the European Union, I think, are far more, more grown up about it, and the European arrest warrants as well. Another thing that's going to scare people.
Yes.
If European arrest warrants are not permitted in the UK,
yes.
that the United Kingdom could become a haven for all kinds of suspects and
Yes.
people on the run from the European police. I mean, it is a scary thought.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move along to our next story this evening. The UK government is to withdraw from the European arrest warrant, what we were just talking about a moment ago. The UK government is to abandon a crucial tool used to speed up the transfer of criminals across borders with other European countries. Acting against warnings of senior law enforcement officials, the government said it would not be seeking to participate in the European arrest warrant, the EAW, as a part of the future relationship with the European Union. The agreement should instead provide a fast-track extradition arrangements based on the EU's surrender agreement with Norway. So, this is quite a lengthy statement we've got here, but basically, this is us pulling out of the European arrest warrant. The government's stating it quite boldly. That they're not going to participate in this. And surely this is a major plank of our crime-fighting
it's
links with Europe.
Such a descent into a moral black hole. Not only is the UK looking as though it's going to become a money laundering centre, sitting right on the edge of Europe, and it's now perhaps going to be a safe haven for criminals.
So
sitting right on the edge of Europe.
So not only will they be able to launder their money here, they'll be able to watch it going around in the washing machine at the same time.
Absolutely, yes.
It is a chilling thought that the government is taking this action. There seems to be a whole series of threats being made by the UK in the run-up to these talks with the Europeans. And of course, we're only a few days away from this now.
Yes.
Because I believe the talks actually start in the first weeks of this coming month. Okay, now there is a little good news from Europe, good news for two countries anyway that entering Europe. The European Union accession talks with two Balkan states could open in the next few weeks. The European Union could open accession talks with Albania and North Macedonia within weeks, as both countries have made good progress in their preparations. The European Commission's enlargement chief, Oliver Varhelyi, he said on Thursday, I beg your pardon, France, which blocked the opening of talks with Tirana and Skopje in October, indicated earlier in February that membership talks could start if the European Commission gave them a positive review in March. Varhelyi said that the Commission's report, due to be released next week, was encouraging. There is serious progress in both countries. I'm very encouraged by the fact that these two countries have chosen to accelerate their preparations, he said after a meeting with the Visegrad group with the Western Balkan states hosted by Prague. With this report, I do hope to convince member states that they are ready and we should be ready to open negotiations, Varhelyi said, adding that he hoped very much to start negotiations with North Macedonia and Albania in the coming weeks. If allowed to go ahead with membership talks, approval would set the stage for a summit with the EU leaders and all 6 Western Balkan candidate countries, Serbia, Kosovo, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia and North Macedonia in Zagreb in May. So it seems that as soon as the UK steps out of the European Union, there are all these new countries waiting to take our place.
Yes.
So it's not as if the European Union is going to be lacking for members or funds, it seems.
No.
And the Balkan states have been on the edges of Europe for many years. And of course, the Balkans war, Kosovo war, has also, led these countries now through a peaceful settlement.
Yes.
Kosovo is now an independent state. And of course, this is a demonstration that there's no queue to enter into the EU. And Croatia got in very quickly as well.
Yes.
So a lot of doomsayers have been claiming that if Scotland became independent, we would have to get to the back of the queue in the European Union.
And there are still people ignorant of that fact and still claiming that.
It seems plain, though, that there are already 2 countries from the Balkans already joined the EU quite quickly as well.
Yes.
And then all these others just waiting in the wings to join in.
That's right, yes.
So I feel a lot happier myself knowing that the European Union is in a healthier state than we imagined.
Yes, yes.
And of course, we're not reading or seeing this kind of story being published or publicised in the UK media for some reason.
That's right.
I wonder why. They don't.
Well, you won't see it in the UK media for obvious reasons.
It jeopardises the position of the negotiations.
Yes,
They're trying to portray the EU as fatally wounded without the brilliant UK in there.
Yeah, yeah.
So, well, I think we can prove them wrong with that story anyway.
Yes.
And now remaining in Eastern Europe, shall we say, the United States has urged Russia to find the masterminds of a Kremlin critic's murder. Now, the United States Embassy in Moscow urged Russia on Thursday to find the people who organised the murder of opposition politician Boris Nemtsov, who was gunned down near the Kremlin 5 years ago. Nemtsov, one of President Vladimir Putin's most vocal critics, was killed in 2015 as he walked home across a bridge near the Kremlin's walls. He had been working on a report examining Russia's role in the conflict in Ukraine. Russia jailed the man in 2017 for 20 years for the murder and handed down terms of between 11 and 19 years to 4 other men convicted of being his accomplices. But the late politician's allies, who are due to hold a commemorative march in his memory in the Russian capital this weekend, have criticised the investigation for failing to identify the people who ordered the killing. Bart Gorman, the chargé d'affaires at the US Embassy in Moscow, was one of several foreign diplomats on Thursday who paid their respects at the bridge and laid flowers. We again call on Russian authorities to investigate those who organised and ordered this horrific crime, the US Embassy spokeswoman Rebecca Ross wrote on Twitter. Nemtsov remains an inspiration to all those who strive for justice, democracy, and a government accountable to the people, she wrote. The Czech authorities said earlier this month that they would rename the square in Prague where the Russian embassy is located after Nemtsov. So this is a story, I think, which many of us in the West were largely unaware of.
Yes, yes.
That one of Mr. Putin's fiercest critics was murdered on a bridge several years ago.
Yeah.
But it seems that there was a trial and several people were put away for this murder. But no further questions were asked about the motive or who ordered the
And he's not the only one. I mean, there have been several people murdered who were vocal critics of Putin over the last decade or so.
Well, it's because it's well known that if you cross Mr. Putin, you end up either jailed or dead.
Yes, yes.
Or a combination of the two.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there have been apparently 42 journalists murdered in Russia in mysterious circumstances, and somehow or other, Putin and his government have managed to remain at arm's length from them. I think, though, the Americans calling for further investigations will probably fall on deaf ears. I can't imagine Mr. Putin will do anything about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to come back now to back to Scotland again for the next story. And this is a good news story for a change. And this is a story about funding for community regeneration. Now, people from disadvantaged and remote rural communities will benefit from £25 million regeneration funding. The Regeneration Capital Grant Fund will support 25 different projects to tackle inequalities and to deliver inclusive growth in some of the most deprived and remote communities in Scotland. These are anticipated to support or create 1,700 jobs, refurbish and bring 38 buildings back into use, including some historic and landmark properties, as well as creating a further 68,000 square metres of business space. Announcing the projects to receive funding at the refurbished Broomhouse Hub Community Centre in Edinburgh, the Community Secretary Aileen Campbell said, "We've invested more than £160 million in projects through this partnership with COSLA since 2014 to tackle inequalities, to support business and create jobs that will promote growth and inclusivity in some of our most deprived, disadvantaged and remote communities across the country." I know this latest £25 million is going to make a big difference to the community projects across Scotland that will share in this award. This new hub in Broomhouse will help support people of all ages to find companionship, to learn new skills, and to offer much needed support for families. It will be an asset to the local community now and for the future, and is an excellent example of what the Regeneration Capital Grant supports each year. COSLA's Environment and Economy spokesperson, Councillor Stephen Heady, said, "The Regeneration Capital Grant Fund continues to provide local authorities with an invaluable tool to help deliver on the regeneration aspirations of the communities that they represent. The range of projects reflects the need for localised approaches to help regenerate communities across the country, all of which help to deliver strong economic, social and physical outcomes." Continuation of the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund for the remainder of the parliamentary term emphasises the joint commitment of local government and Scottish Government to regenerating deprived and disadvantaged communities. And I look forward to seeing what further innovative projects come forward in future rounds of this fund. I think, Dave, this may be something which is in your remit as a rural commentator.
Yes.
It talks about deprived rural communities in areas where we don't traditionally think of there being poverty or deprivation. But I know that you've told me before that there are villages and towns across Scotland which suffer from this.
Yes, in my own village, which is reputed to have more millionaires in my village than any other village in Scotland. But we do have some families who are seriously deprived, and they feel the deprivation doubly because they're in this wealthy village. And they're not easy to identify. But we have, in Stirling, they have quite a good way of identifying people and working with the communities and getting us all to work together through the community planning forums. Yep. And for instance, I'm thinking it all really started with the Village Halls Summit way back in 2007, I think it was, and it was called up at Aviemore.
Okay.
And people came from all over, and I think I may have talked to you about this before. There was a map in the hall, and you had to put the pin in from wherever you were. And they came from Orkney, from Shetland, from Scalpay, from way down in Dunbar, and over to the west, Girvan and places like that. And it was really inspiring, and a lot of funding, I don't know how much, but a lot of funding went into it. And I remember Richard Lochhead saying that we were the heroes because we kept our village halls going, and they were the hubs, and that was the word he used.
These are the places
hubs.
Where people would meet.
Yes. Now, okay, that was all about rural ones.
Yeah.
But as the years went on and land reform took a hold, and then it was talked about, Andy and what's she called again, with the long blonde hair, writes books, very inspiring. Leslie Riddoch.
Oh, Leslie Riddoch.
Yes.
I thought we were playing a game there.
No, Andy Whiteman and Leslie Riddoch were very good at talking about how we needed to devolve money down to the local authorities to then devolve it down to the communities.
Yeah,
and I kept saying to them, but we've already got that in Stirling.
You've got that already going.
We've already got it, and this is a model. And you know, Leslie didn't really believe me.
Well,
I
grew up in Ayrshire many years ago before I came back to Glasgow. And I remember, particularly in South Ayrshire, there is massive rural poverty there because there used to be mining villages there. There used to be chemical factories. There used to be the dynamite plant down there at Ardere. And all of these things gradually have disappeared. The harbours are now derelict and the factories have gone. And there are massive areas where nothing happens, where people can't find work. They have to come back to cities to find it. So, you know, I can see the point of a
There's a village down there inland, further inland near Dumfries House, that there's a mining village and serious deprivation in that period of time, 2007 and so on. And there was a landowner down there who bought an estate, and he got the community involved in the estate, and instead of the place being ransacked as it regularly was, he got them to look after it and help. And you're trying to go on to something else, aren't you?
I'm sorry. Sorry, Davey.
But it was a huge success story.
I did like the story, but I'm afraid we do have to
well,
move on.
you need to come back and do some more rural stuff.
Okay, well, the next story is actually more about funding. This time it's about funds to maximise benefit take-up. Organisations which help to maximise the take-up of benefits and household incomes in Scotland have been awarded £600,000. 26 bodies from across the country received allocations to support hard-to-reach parents, groups of people, and people with particular barriers such as mental or physical disabilities who need to apply for Scottish social security benefits. So this is another story of the Scottish Government giving money when it's needed to services which are actually going to try and find people who actually need to access benefits but perhaps don't know how to do it or don't know of them. Again, another good news story, I think.
Yes, very much so.
We don't think about this very often, but many people who need benefits don't know about them.
Well, again, it comes back to my community. We have a community support worker. Oh, what a woman she is. And I can remember her coming to me at one point because she knew that I was having trees planted on the farm. And she said, we need to contact Polish people because we want to ensure that they know if they're living here and working here, that they can get help, and we want to know where they are so that they can come to us for help should they need it.
I remember in the old days they used to refer to people like this as welfare rights officers who were employed usually by local authorities to tell people what
their
benefits
rights were
they could get and to point them at them and show them how to apply. I'd like to move along, Dave, if you don't mind, to our next story. This is Gail Ross. Now, Gail Ross is to step down at the 2021 Holyrood election. The SNP MSP for Caithness, Sutherland and Ross has announced that she will not be standing for re-election in the Holyrood elections next year. Ms Ross from Wick was first elected to the Highland Council in 2011 in a Wick by-election. She was then elected to the Highland Council elected in the Highland Council election in 2012 and was Caithness civic leader until her election to Holyrood in 2016. In her role as MSP, she was deputy convener of the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee, on the Public Audit Committee, the Equalities and Human Rights Committee, and is currently the Deputy Convener of the Petitions Committee, so it's a very busy woman. Also the convener of the cross-party group on the prevention and healing of adverse childhood experiences, convener of the cross-party group on food, and a member of the Education and Skills Committee. So she has obviously taken on a tremendous workload. Anyway, she said the decision has been reached due to the demands of travelling to Edinburgh and being away from home for sometimes 5 days a week, every week. I want to be able to spend more time with my family, to watch my son grow up and to be more involved in local issues, things that I can't presently do. The sheer size of the area I represent also means that I'm having difficulty in reaching every part of the constituency on a regular basis, and I'm not able to represent my constituents in the way that they deserve and rightly expect. I recently asked the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee to ask if there's any possibility that members could video in the meetings and remotely vote. If we are to encourage into politics more young people with families who live far away from Edinburgh, this has to be considered. It's not been an easy decision to make, and I wish to sincerely thank everyone who has supported me in my journey through Council and then Parliament. It's been a huge privilege to represent the place where I grew up, and although the job has sometimes been very challenging, these years have been some of the most rewarding of my professional career. My drive for independence is stronger than ever, and I'll continue to work to make sure that all families can grow and prosper in an independent Scotland. So another SNP MSP is leaving the fold.
She is, but equally, I think she's done a great job in drawing attention to the fact that here we are in a century where technology is king And we are not embracing it the way we should.
We should be able to have virtual meetings. We
Absolutely.
should be able to have telepresence
Yes.
and
Yes.
people appearing on screens
Absolutely.
in meetings.
Yes.
Yeah, we're not using this.
We're not doing it. I mean, and it's the same problem with the organisations that I've been involved in, that very occasionally we'll do a video conferencing, but not nearly often enough.
Well, maybe soon.
And it's adding to the carbon footprint if all these people are having to
Travelling
travel
around
for miles.
unnecessarily, absolutely,
Absolutely.
Day. Yeah. Day, I'm going to move to our final story tonight, which interestingly involves women again. And this time, significant women in Scotland's history are to be honoured by Historic Environment Scotland. 6 trailblazing women from Scotland's past, from the country's first female solicitor to the first Scottish woman to direct a feature-length film, have been recognised as Historic Environment Scotland announced the latest round of recipients for its commemorative plaque scheme today. That's Thursday, the 27th of February. The national scheme, which has been running since 2012, celebrates noteworthy individuals from Scottish public life as nominated by the public, by erecting plaques on buildings with strong links to their life or work. The successful female recipients under this year's scheme are Madge Easton Anderson, from 1896 to 1982, the first female solicitor in Scotland, later became the first woman to qualify to practice law in both England and Scotland, and a partner in the first known law firm to be led entirely by women. The plaque will be installed at the Stair building, which houses the University of Glasgow School of Law. And then there's Mary Burton, who lived from 1819 to 1909, a social reformer and a suffragist. In 1869, she successfully campaigned for the Watt Institution and the School of Arts, now Heriot Watt University, to admit female students. The plaque will be installed at Liberton Bank House in Edinburgh, where Burton lived. Cicely Isabel Fairfield, from 1892 to 1983, better known under the pen name of Rebecca West Fairfield, who was a novelist, a travel writer, and a journalist who famously reported on the Nuremberg trials. Her plaque will be installed at Hope Park Square in Edinburgh, which was the location of West's childhood home and the inspiration of her novel. Isabel Wiley Hutchison, 1889 to 1982, Arctic traveller and botanist who risked life and limb collecting plants for the Royal Botanic Gardens in Kew. She pioneered new routes across inhospitable terrain, boarded ghost ships and captured some of the earliest documentary footage ever recorded. The plaque will be installed at Carlowry Castle in West Lothian, Hutchison's birthplace and lifelong home. Elizabeth Buchanan Mitchell, 1880 to 1980, one of Scotland's leading early female town planners and a pioneer in the profession. Plaque to be installed on the site of Mitchell's home in Biggar in Lanarkshire. Dr. Margaret Caroline Tate, 1918 to 1999, avant-garde filmmaker and the first Scottish woman to direct a feature-length film with 1992's Blue Black Permanent. Tate also was an accomplished poet who published 3 books of poetry, and her plaque will be installed at Tate's birthplace in Kirkwall. The announcement comes ahead of the Women's History Month, which is celebrated each year in March to document the lives and achievements of women. Barbara Cummins, the Director of Heritage at HES, said, "The contribution of women in Scotland's history is often overlooked, and I'm pleased that this year's commemorative plaque awards give us the opportunity to celebrate the life and work of truly inspirational women." Dave, well, we're running out of time, but this is a wonderful piece to end on, because so many women in Scotland just have gone unremarked
and unrecognised.
And unrecognised, and this is finally a little recognition.
Yes.
I think my favourite thing about this story is the fact that it's the public who vote for them.
Yes.
It's not somebody picking these people, it's who the public like.
Yeah.
Do you have any special favourites out of that little
No,
bunch?
not especially. I'm just gobsmacked that they're there, and we're now learning about them, and they were sort of undercover before. One of the things, when I came back from France the other week, in the airport they had portraits up of women in science. Present-day women in science.
And people like Madame Curie. And,
no, present-day women in science.
Oh, right, I beg your pardon.
Sorry. Really interesting. I mean, it was a wall that size, covered in portraits of women very active in science.
Well, I should probably also point out that scientists and famous people are also available in Mail. And there are a whole series of blue flags dedicated to men that we don't have time to fit into the show this evening. But anyway, on this happy note, I see that we are coming to the end of the show. So this is where I get to say goodbye to you again, Day, and thank you for being our guest again this evening.
My pleasure.
In the meantime, it's just time for me to tell you, as usual, that, as you know, making programmes is expensive and Broadcasting Scotland needs your help. If you'd like to become a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions at the bottom of your screens now. Give your £5 a month and help us to produce more and better programmes. And help us to pay our next month's electricity bill. Anyway, that's it from Scotland at 7 this evening. I'll be back again on Monday. Kenny will also be back next week. But for the moment, from us at Scotland at 7 at Cowcaddens, a very good night to you.